Sometimes the road that changes your life looks exactly like every other road until the moment everything changes. Emily Carter had no reason to believe this Thursday afternoon would be different from any other. The 35-year-old single mother was driving home along a quiet two-lane road outside Cedar Grove, Illinois, after finishing an extra shift at the medical clinic where she worked. Her 8-year-old daughter, Sophie, would be waiting at her neighbor's house, and Emily was already mentally reviewing the evening ahead. Homework, dinner, laundry, and preparing for another busy day tomorrow. Life had become a carefully balanced routine built around responsibility. There was very little room left for surprises. The sky overhead was painted with soft shades of gold and orange as the sun slowly lowered toward the horizon. Autumn leaves drifted across the pavement, and the countryside seemed unusually peaceful. Then, without warning, Emily heard a strange sound from beneath the hood. Her stomach tightened immediately. The engine sputtered once, then again. A warning light flashed across the dashboard. "No, no, no," she whispered. A few seconds later, the car lost power completely and rolled to a stop on the shoulder of the road. Emily closed her eyes and leaned back against the seat. This was the last thing she needed. Money had been tight for years. Every unexpected expense felt like a personal challenge. She tried restarting the engine several times, but nothing happened. The silence that followed felt heavy. After a long sigh, she stepped out of the car and lifted the hood despite knowing almost nothing about engines. She stared at the machinery in front of her as if it might somehow explain itself. Several vehicles passed without slowing down. Emily wrapped her arms around herself as a cool breeze moved across the open fields. For a moment, she felt completely alone. Then she heard another vehicle approaching. A sleek black SUV slowed and pulled over several yards ahead. Emily assumed the driver was stopping to check directions or answer a phone call. Instead, the driver's door opened, and a tall man stepped out. He looked to be around 40 years old, dressed simply in dark jeans and a jacket despite the unmistakable confidence in his posture. He walked toward her with an easy smile. "Car trouble?" he asked. Emily laughed softly. "I think that is becoming obvious." The man glanced under the hood. "Mind if I take a look?" Emily hesitated for only a second before stepping aside. "Be my guest. At this point, I am accepting miracles." He chuckled and examined the engine with surprising familiarity. As he worked, Emily studied him briefly. There was something calm about him. Familiar, almost. But she dismissed the thought. Small towns had a way of making strangers seem recognizable. After several minutes, the man straightened and explained what he thought the problem might be. Emily listened carefully, grateful simply to have someone willing to help. Neither realized that this roadside encounter was far more than an act of kindness. Neither knew that the next few minutes would connect two lives that had once been inseparable. And neither could imagine that 15 years of unanswered questions were quietly waiting on the side of that lonely road. The man worked quietly for several more minutes before closing the hood halfway and wiping his hands with a cloth from his vehicle. Emily watched him with growing curiosity. Most people would have offered sympathy and driven away. This stranger had stopped his day without hesitation. "Well?" she asked hopefully. He smiled. "I think I found the problem. It is a loose connection. Nothing too serious." Relief immediately washed over her face. "Please tell me you are not joking. I would never joke about something that important." Emily laughed. "You have no idea how happy that makes me." The man finished securing the connection and gestured toward the driver's seat. "Try it now." Emily climbed into the car and turned the key. The engine started instantly. She stared at the dashboard in disbelief before looking back through the windshield. The stranger simply smiled. After shutting the engine off again, she stepped out and walked toward him. "Thank you. Seriously, you probably saved my entire week. I'm glad it was something simple." For a moment, they stood beside the road while the evening sunlight painted the fields around them in shades of gold. The conversation should have ended there. Emily should have thanked him again, gotten into her car, and driven away. Instead, something kept both of them standing there. "I am Emily, by the way," she said. The man froze. It was subtle, so subtle that most people would have missed it. But for a brief second, his expression changed completely. "Emily," he repeated. "Emily Carter." The color seemed to drain from his face. He looked at her more carefully now, as if seeing her for the first time. 15 years had changed many things. They had added experience, responsibility, and a few traces of age. Yet suddenly he could see traces of the girl he once knew. The same eyes, the same smile, the same gentle way of speaking. Emily noticed the strange look on his face. "Is everything okay?" she asked. The man opened his mouth, but said nothing at first. Then he slowly smiled. "I cannot believe this." A feeling of confusion settled over her. "Believe what?" He shook his head slightly, almost laughing at the absurdity of the moment. "You really do not recognize me, do you?" Emily studied him more closely. The familiar feeling returned, stronger this time. She looked at his eyes, his smile, the shape of his face. Suddenly her heartbeat quickened. "Wait." The word escaped before she could stop it. "No way." The man nodded once. "Hi, Emily." For several seconds neither moved. The years seemed to disappear all at once. "Ryan?" she whispered. "Ryan Mitchell?" He laughed softly. "Last time I checked." Emily stared at him in complete disbelief. Memories she had not thought about in years rushed back all at once. Football games, school dances, long summer evenings, dreams about the future. The boy she had once imagined spending her entire life with. Standing beside her broken car was not a stranger. It was her first love, and judging by the expression on Ryan's face, he was just as shocked as she was. For several minutes, neither Emily nor Ryan seemed capable of leaving. The broken car had become an afterthought. They stood beside the quiet road, caught somewhere between the past and the present. Eventually, Emily laughed softly and shook her head. "This is impossible." Ryan smiled. "That is exactly what I was thinking." The sun continued sinking toward the horizon as they talked. At first, the conversation stayed safely focused on simple questions. Where had life taken them? How long had they been back in the area? What had happened after high school? Yet beneath every answer was a deeper curiosity neither could hide. 15 years was a long time. Long enough for entire lives to unfold. Emily learned that Ryan had spent years building a technology company that eventually became one of the most successful firms in the country. She had seen his name in articles before, though she had never connected it to the boy she once knew. The shy teenager who used to spend hours talking about ideas and inventions had become one of the most recognizable business leaders in America. Ryan seemed almost uncomfortable discussing it. Whenever Emily asked about work, he quickly redirected the conversation. "Enough about me," he said. "Tell me about your life." Emily hesitated briefly before answering. "I work at a medical clinic in town." Ryan nodded. "You always wanted to help people." She smiled. "Some dreams survive." The comment carried more meaning than either acknowledged. Ryan noticed a small drawing taped inside the corner of her windshield. Bright colors, childlike handwriting, a heart beside a smiling stick figure. "Your daughter made that?" he asked. Emily looked toward the drawing and smiled immediately. "Yes. Sophie is 8. Ryan felt something unexpected in his chest. "You have a daughter." "I do." The warmth in Emily's voice made it obvious how much she loved her child. She reached into her purse and showed him a photo. Sophie stood missing one front tooth and wearing an enormous grin. Ryan laughed. "She looks like trouble." "Constant trouble," Emily replied proudly. For a moment, Ryan found himself studying the photograph. Not because of Sophie, but because of what it represented. Entire chapters of Emily's life had happened without him. Birthdays, first days of school, challenges, triumphs, memories. He suddenly became aware of how much time had passed. Emily noticed a similar feeling. The young man she once knew had become someone completely different and yet strangely familiar. The confidence was new. The success was new. But the kindness that had always made her trust him remained exactly the same. Eventually, Ryan glanced at his watch and sighed. "I should probably let you get home." Emily nodded, though neither seemed eager to end the conversation. Ryan reached into his pocket and handed her a business card. "In case your car decides it misses me." Emily laughed. Then she carefully tucked the card away. Before getting into her car, she looked back at him. "It was good seeing you again." Ryan held her gaze for a second longer than necessary. Better than good. As Emily drove away, both carried the same realization. The stranger on the roadside was gone. In his place stood someone they had never truly forgotten, and neither could stop wondering what might happen next. The following week passed more slowly than either of them expected. Emily returned to her normal routine at the clinic, helping patients during the day and spending every evening with Sophie. Yet no matter how busy she remained, her thoughts occasionally drifted back to the roadside encounter. She found herself wondering how someone could disappear from her life for 15 years and then suddenly feel familiar again within minutes. One Tuesday evening, after Sophie had finished her homework, Emily opened a kitchen drawer searching for a pen. Instead, she found herself looking at Ryan's business card. She stared at it longer than she intended. Before she could change her mind, she picked up her phone and sent a simple message. "Thank you again for saving me from an expensive repair bill." Several minutes later, her phone buzzed. "Best roadside rescue of my career." Emily laughed immediately. From that moment, a quiet conversation began. At first, the messages were occasional. Then they became daily. Ryan often sent a funny observation from his day. Emily responded with stories about Sophie. Neither acknowledged how much they looked forward to those conversations. A few days later, Ryan invited her to meet for coffee. Emily almost said no. Her life had become carefully structured. Unexpected emotional complications were not part of the plan. But curiosity eventually won. On Saturday morning, they met at a small coffee shop overlooking the town square. The moment Ryan walked inside, Emily realized something surprising. She was nervous. Ryan seemed equally affected. They spent nearly 2 hours talking. Conversation flowed effortlessly between present and past. They remembered teachers, classmates, football games, and countless moments they had forgotten they still remembered. At one point, Ryan laughed and said, "Do you remember the science fair disaster?" Emily covered her face. "Please do not remind me." The volcano exploded all over the principal. She groaned while laughing. "I spent a week apologizing. It was still the greatest science project I ever saw." Their laughter attracted curious glances from nearby customers. For a few moments, they felt young again. Yet beneath the nostalgia, something deeper was happening. They were slowly getting to know the people they had become. Ryan listened carefully whenever Emily spoke about Sophie. Emily noticed how rarely Ryan talked about his wealth. In fact, he seemed far more interested in hearing about ordinary moments than discussing business success. Before leaving, Ryan reached into his jacket and placed a small object on the table. Emily looked down and froze. It was an old photograph. Two teenagers smiling beside a lake during their senior year of high school. "You kept that?" she asked softly. Ryan smiled. "Apparently, I am sentimental." Emily stared at the picture. She had not seen it in years. The memory felt both distant and immediate. As they left the coffee shop, neither mentioned the growing feeling between them. Neither was ready for that conversation. But as Emily drove home and Ryan watched her leave, both carried the same realization. The past was no longer just a memory. It was beginning to step back into their lives, one conversation at a time. Over the next several weeks, something unexpected happened. The conversations between Emily and Ryan became part of everyday life. Neither planned it. Neither spoke about it. Yet both quietly noticed how often they reached for their phones, hoping to see a message from the other. One Saturday afternoon, Ryan invited Emily and Sophie to a community fair being held near the lake where they had spent so much time as teenagers. Emily hesitated at first. Bringing Sophie into this growing friendship somehow made everything feel more significant. But Sophie solved the dilemma immediately. "Please say yes," she begged after hearing about the invitation. "There are food trucks, games, and a petting zoo." Emily laughed. "You seem very informed." "I did research." By noon the following Saturday, they were walking through the fairgrounds together beneath clear blue skies. Sophie quickly proved impossible to slow down. Within minutes, she had pulled both adults toward every attraction in sight. Ryan seemed to enjoy her enthusiasm as much as she did. Emily watched him help Sophie win a stuffed bear at one of the game booths and felt something warm settle in her chest. He was patient, kind, present. The same qualities she remembered from years ago had not disappeared. They had simply grown stronger. Later that afternoon, while Sophie explored a craft station nearby, Emily and Ryan found themselves sitting on a bench overlooking the lake. The water shimmered beneath the sunlight. For a few moments, neither spoke. Then Ryan looked across the water and smiled faintly. "Do you remember graduation night?" Emily immediately did. The memory arrived with surprising clarity. The lake, the stars, the endless conversations about the future. "I remember," she said quietly. Ryan nodded. "Back then I thought I had my entire life figured out." Emily laughed softly. "That makes two of us." The conversation gradually turned more serious. For the first time since reconnecting, they spoke openly about the day everything changed 15 years earlier. Emily looked down at her hands. "I always wondered what happened." Ryan's expression shifted. "You did?" "Of course I did." He stared at the water for several seconds before answering. I thought you stopped returning my calls because you wanted to move on. Emily turned toward him in surprise. What? Ryan looked equally confused. You disappeared. Ryan, I never disappeared. The words hung between them. Suddenly both were paying very close attention. Emily slowly shook her head. I waited for weeks to hear from you. Ryan frowned. That cannot be right. Neither understood what they were uncovering, but something felt wrong. Very wrong. The story both had believed for 15 years no longer fit together. Before either could explore the mystery further, Sophie came running toward them holding a colorful painting she had just finished. The serious moment disappeared, yet neither forgot it. Later that evening, after Emily and Sophie returned home, Ryan sat alone in his study thinking about the conversation. For the first time in years, he began questioning the memory that had shaped so much of his life. And somewhere inside an old storage box hidden in the back of a closet, a forgotten piece of the truth was quietly waiting to be found. The question lingered in both of their minds long after the afternoon by the lake ended. If Emily had not stopped answering Ryan's calls, and Ryan had not chosen to walk away, then what had really happened 15 years ago? The uncertainty followed Ryan throughout the week. During business meetings, while reviewing reports, and even late at night, he found himself replaying old memories. The more he thought about them, the more details seemed incomplete. One evening, unable to ignore the feeling any longer, he began searching through storage boxes in a spare room of his home. Most contained ordinary reminders of the past. Old yearbooks, college notebooks, family photographs. Then, near the bottom of a faded cardboard box, he found something that made him stop. It was a small bundle of letters tied together with a blue ribbon. Ryan immediately recognized the handwriting. Emily's. He sat down slowly and opened the first envelope. The date written on the corner was from the summer after graduation. His heart began to race. One by one, he read through the letters. Emily had written about her plans, her fears, her excitement for the future, and most importantly, how much she missed him. Ryan stared at the pages in disbelief. He had never seen them before. Every letter had been returned to sender. A second envelope contained an explanation from an old apartment manager. Years ago, a mailing error had caused several pieces of forwarded mail to be returned without reaching their destination. Ryan sat in complete silence. The truth was suddenly obvious. Emily had never abandoned him. She had spent weeks trying to stay connected while he believed she had chosen to leave. 15 years of misunderstanding had been created by something neither of them could control. The realization left him speechless. Meanwhile, across town, Emily faced a different challenge. Sophie had become increasingly curious about Ryan. During dinner one evening, she finally asked the question Emily had been expecting. Do you like him? Emily nearly dropped her fork. What kind of question is that? Sophie smiled mischievously. A very good one. Emily tried to hide her amusement. Ryan is a friend. Sophie considered that answer for approximately 2 seconds. That is not what I asked. Emily laughed despite herself. Children often notice truths adults worked hard to avoid. Sophie leaned forward. You smile more now. The simple observation stayed with Emily long after dinner ended. Later that night, she found herself sitting alone on the back porch watching the stars appear overhead. Sophie was right. Somewhere between coffee conversations, shared memories, and unexpected afternoons together, something inside her had changed. Life felt lighter. Hope felt possible again. At the same moment, Ryan sat in his study holding one of Emily's letters. The pages had yellowed with age, but the emotions remained clear. For the first time, he understood exactly how much they had lost. Yet alongside the sadness came something else. Gratitude. They had been given another chance to find the truth. Another chance to know each other again. Another chance to decide what came next. Neither Emily nor Ryan realized it yet, but the past was finally beginning to release its hold on them. The truth had been found. The harder question was whether they would be brave enough to build a future from it. The discovery of the letters changed everything for Ryan, but he did not immediately tell Emily what he had found. Part of him wanted to share the truth the moment he learned it. Another part needed time to process the weight of it. 15 years. 15 years spent believing a story that had never been true. The realization was both heartbreaking and strangely hopeful. A few days later, Ryan invited Emily and Sophie to dinner at a small family-owned restaurant overlooking the river. It was the kind of place where nobody cared about business headlines or financial success. People came for good food and familiar faces. Emily appreciated that. As they settled into a booth near the window, Sophie immediately began describing every interesting thing that had happened during her week. Ryan listened with genuine attention, laughing at the right moments and asking thoughtful questions. Watching them together stirred complicated emotions inside Emily. Sophie clearly adored him. More importantly, Ryan seemed equally comfortable around her. That should have made Emily happy. Instead, it made her nervous. Hope had a way of creating new risks. After dinner, Sophie excused herself to visit the dessert counter. The moment she disappeared, a quiet silence settled between the adults. Ryan noticed Emily staring out the window toward the river. "You seem distracted," he said gently. Emily smiled, though it did not quite reach her eyes. "Just thinking." "About what?" She hesitated before answering. "About how strange all of this feels." Ryan understood immediately. Seeing each other again? More than that. Emily looked at him. "A few months ago, you were a memory. Now you are part of my life again." Ryan nodded slowly. "I know exactly what you mean." Emily lowered her gaze. "That is what scares me." The honesty surprised both of them. Ryan remained quiet, allowing her to continue. "When you are a single parent, you learn to protect your world very carefully," she said. "You stop expecting good things because losing them hurts too much." Ryan felt the truth of those words. "Emily." She looked up. "You do not have to explain." For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Ryan made a decision. He reached into his jacket and carefully removed one of the old letters. Emily frowned in confusion as he placed it on the table. The moment she recognized her own handwriting, her eyes widened. "What is this?" Ryan told her everything. The return mail, the forwarding mistake, the letters he had never received. Emily listened in complete silence. By the time he finished, tears had filled her eyes. "I wrote so many," she whispered. "I know. I thought you ignored them." Ryan shook his head. "And I thought you stopped writing." The sadness in that realization was impossible to ignore. Yet something else existed beside it. Relief. For the first time, the mystery that had haunted them both finally had an answer. Sophie returned carrying a giant slice of chocolate cake just as the emotional conversation ended. Neither adult mentioned what had happened. But later that night, as Emily drove home beneath a sky full of stars, she understood something she had been avoiding for weeks. The greatest danger was no longer reopening an old chapter. The greatest danger was realizing she might not want to close it again. The weeks that followed felt different. Not because life suddenly became perfect, but because the uncertainty that had once stood between Emily and Ryan was gone. The truth about the lost letters had answered questions neither of them thought would ever be resolved. Yet with those answers came a new challenge. For the first time, they could no longer blame the past for keeping them apart. Now they had to decide what they wanted in the present. Emily tried not to think about that too often. She focused on work, on Sophie, and on maintaining the careful balance she had built over the years. But every time her phone displayed Ryan's name, her heart still reacted before her mind could catch up. One Saturday morning, Ryan invited Emily and Sophie to visit a local fall festival held at a nearby farm. Sophie enthusiastically accepted before Emily could finish reading the message. By noon, they were walking through fields filled with pumpkins, hayrides, and families enjoying the weekend. The atmosphere felt easy and familiar. Sophie spent most of the afternoon running between activities while Ryan and Emily followed behind at a slower pace. At one point, they found themselves standing near a small orchard while Sophie participated in a children's scavenger hunt. Ryan looked around and smiled. "I forgot places like this existed." Emily laughed. "That is because billionaires do not spend enough time at pumpkin farms." Ryan shook his head. "You know, you are surprisingly unimpressed by my financial status." "Should I be impressed?" "Most people are." Emily smiled. "The richest thing about you was never your bank account." Ryan stared at her for a moment before looking away, clearly affected by the comment. Neither spoke for several seconds. Some words carried more weight than others. Later that afternoon, while Sophie proudly displayed a basket full of prizes she had collected, she suddenly looked at both adults and asked a question that stopped them completely. "Why did you two stop talking all those years ago?" Emily nearly choked on her apple cider. Ryan looked equally unprepared. Sophie frowned. "What?" "It is a normal question." The adults exchanged an awkward glance. Eventually, Ryan smiled. Sometimes people misunderstand each other. Sophie considered that answer carefully. That seems like a silly reason. Emily laughed despite herself. Children often had a way of reducing complicated emotional history into a single sentence. As the day continued, the question lingered in both adults' minds. That evening, after Sophie had fallen asleep, Emily sat alone in her living room thinking about everything that had happened. The truth was becoming impossible to ignore. She cared about Ryan, perhaps more than she wanted to admit. But another truth existed alongside it. Ryan's world was vastly different from hers. He could live anywhere, travel anywhere, build anything. Emily's life revolved around school schedules, grocery lists, and making sure Sophie felt secure. The contrast worried her. For the first time since reconnecting, fear began quietly returning. Not fear of the past, fear of the future. Meanwhile, across town, Ryan sat at his desk looking at another unopened envelope from the old box of memories. Unlike the others, this one contained something he had never seen before. As he carefully unfolded the pages inside, he realized he was holding a letter that might change everything once again. The letter Ryan discovered that evening was unlike the others. It had never been mailed. The envelope remained sealed, with his own handwriting on the front and Emily's name carefully written beneath it. For several minutes, he simply stared at it. Then he opened it. Inside was a letter he had written shortly after believing Emily had stopped responding to him. The pages revealed the confusion, heartbreak, and hope he had felt at the time. But one sentence stood out above everything else. If I ever see you again, I hope I have the courage to tell you that losing you was the greatest regret of my life. Ryan sat in silence after reading those words. 15 years had passed, yet the truth inside them remained unchanged. The next afternoon, he called Emily and asked if she would meet him. His voice carried a seriousness she immediately noticed. An hour later, they stood together beside the same quiet road where her car had broken down months earlier. The autumn landscape looked different now. The trees had begun preparing for winter. A cool breeze moved across the fields, yet the place still felt familiar. It was where everything had started again. Emily looked at him curiously. You sounded nervous on the phone. Ryan smiled. I am. That admission made her smile too. Ryan handed her the letter. She read it slowly. By the time she reached the final page, her eyes had filled with tears. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, Emily folded the letter carefully and looked up. You really wrote this? I did. Why did you keep it? Ryan glanced toward the road stretching into the distance. Because part of me never stopped hoping. The honesty in his voice left no room for doubt. Emily felt years of uncertainty, misunderstanding, and fear quietly falling away. Ryan took a slow breath. I spent a long time building a successful life. He smiled faintly. People see the company, the headlines, and the achievements. Then his expression softened. But none of that ever replaced what I thought I lost. Emily's eyes never left his. Ryan. He stepped closer. I am not asking you to relive the past. I am not asking you to ignore reality. I know your life is here. I know Sophie comes first. Emily nodded. She always will. And she should. Ryan smiled warmly. What I am asking is whether we can stop letting old fears make decisions for us. For a moment, the only sound came from the wind moving through the trees. Then Emily laughed softly through her tears. Do you know what Sophie told me last week? Ryan shook his head. She said it would be silly to let a misunderstanding keep two people apart forever. Ryan laughed. She is a very wise 8-year-old. Emily looked at the road behind them. Months earlier, she had stood there feeling stranded and alone. Now everything felt different. The future was still uncertain. Life would still bring challenges. But for the first time in years, uncertainty did not feel frightening. It felt hopeful. She reached for Ryan's hand. I think Sophie might be right. Ryan smiled. Neither needed to say anything more. As the sun began setting across the Illinois countryside, they stood together where chance had reunited them. The broken car was gone. The misunderstanding was gone. Even the years that had separated them seemed less important now. Sometimes life offers a second chance in the most ordinary place imaginable. And sometimes the road where everything once fell apart becomes the road that finally leads you home.